the prize, who is our prize winner, and Sevhil Musaeva will join us in a moment. So, Serhiy, how would you explain about the truth and prove that you've been doing this with the benefit for profession? Today we have to think that not about making a good material, but also to prove that that you have moral type to do this. For example, recently we had Alexander Granovsky, member of parliament from Petro Poroshenko bloc, and he for a long period of time was called a curator, but we had no facts and proofs. Of course, I had no hope, expectation to get the exact document stating that he is a person who controls the prosecutor general office. So once we were informed that he was planning a meeting in the restaurant, so we went to the restaurant and found him and people with whom he met. He had a separate room in the restaurant, so our operator started, our cameraman started to shoot all those all those people who were around him, and we found that SBU was the security guys from SBU. So they approached to our cameraman. They pictured the idea of that cameraman, and he tried to take his passport, but I interfered, and very soon Granovsky posted that he is surveyed all the time. We have a balcony, please speak louder. He is surveyed, and people, there is a serious structure which tries to survey him, and he published information that please people help. And when I was in the restaurant, I spoke to Granovsky and said, you are in a public place while we shoot you on camera in public place, you're a public person. And then he posted that he is surveyed, and then some journalists and some bloggers shared this topic. They started to write that Tkach surveys him, interferes into his telephone talks, and recollected that I published some telephone talks between Kamyanske and Lutsenko. So we decided to prove first that we wanted to get publicly important information from that restaurant. and we found they had on our documentary we found the head of the regional court, and we proved that he met with public people, so we had the right to shoot them on camera. Then we called to Ukrainska. Then that cameraman whose IDs was photocopied by SBU, he was double-checked, and the publication was called "We Know Now Who Tries to Survey Granovsky, an MP Granovsky," and although we never tried to hide what we were doing, then we called to them and said, you know, we never tried to hide who we are and what we were doing. First, Granovsky tried to prevent that materials from publication. He applied to court seeking for court ruling about non-publication of the materials, but we were informed about that court application, and we had time to protest against it. So actually the case was not about surveillance. So actually, we simply shooted him on video in a restaurant, and that was it. Actually, in a moment, we will allow everybody to speak. Mykhailo told the story which proved that you were not surveying the figure from the presidential bloc. So this was the answer to a question how to prove that you were not a traitor, a spy. Nastia, how did you manage to prove that you did not control the targets when for the fire, that you were not fire pointing person, so to say? Mykhailo told you his story. I'll tell you another story which happened on July 6th in Avdiivka industrial plant. This is one of our hotspots at the contact line. The story was rather simple, and a lot of such stories happened to me. Kostya Revutsky and me quite often visit that hotspot, so we reached agreement with our commanders of paratroopers who are deployed in the region about our regular visits. Novaya Gazeta and Anya from Novaya Gazeta also was with us, and I think they deserve our recognition for their very honest stories. Yulia from Novaya Gazeta was presented to the commander of our troops deployed there. He promised to help us, and he took us to that hotspot. We met with our servicemen. We had very open talks, but next day two servicemen who provided big assistance to us. That two servicemen were killed. Actually, one of them was heavily wounded. We tried to help him, and he died from wounds. What happened then? Actually, that mine bomb fall in that trench where we stayed all together. So the next, very soon, Yulia's story was published, but the story was prevented from publication very under pretext that the trenches were targeted, and commander said that they had to change the trench, and they asked us not to publish a story within 24 hours. Also, yes, of course, we understood this, and we even suggested to show our materials in advance to the commander, so they agreed to review it on July 7th at 10 p.m. Yulia showed them that story but and at 5 p.m. we showed the final version of that TV story, but by 5 a.m. The storm of claims fall upon us. We were blamed that we have brought a Russian spy, that Novaya Gazeta was doing something wrong in Russia, that we caused fire upon those people who remained in trenches, and so this was terrible. We were blamed and accused in disclosure of our positions, and we were accused that we represented our colleague as Hromadske journalist, while she was a journalist from Novaya Gazeta. So we had sent that TV story to the Ministry of Defense, and the only comment that we received that the soldier who was killed, and the only accusation that we have got back from the ministry was about a soldier who was wounded, and paramedic allowed painkiller, injected painkiller even into this soldier, and he said that he cannot leave the positions because he thinks that they won't cope without him. So the Ministry of Defense accused us that we stated that we did not have enough servicemen at the front line. Well, we did not say this. We only stated that that very soldier did not wish to go to the hospital because he thought that his mates won't cope without him. So finally the situation was clarified and all the accusations were removed, but they never made official apologies. And all that accusations via bots and via false statements, that thousands and thousands of accusations and untrue accusations they actually damaged our reputation. I've been working at the front line for 3 years, and I received calls from servicemen and blamed me in that casualty, which was occasional, which was not because of our work. It was really just occasional because of bomb mine. And people accused me that I brought a Russian journalist to the front line, that she caused fire. So this was a very difficult situation. There were very long negotiations with the Ministry of Defense with the participation of OSCE. So now OSCE is planning a big conference in Vienna, in Austria, and they invited us to present this case as a positive experience of cooperation. Well, I said to them, it wasn't a positive example. Some few days ago, the minister expressed his gratitude to me for the service to Ukrainian people.
I know that some of the robots continue to ride despite all these things. Yesterday was also a very exciting day. Sevhil, I'll give you the mic. Sevhil, it's your turn. Now we'll be talking about the stories when we have to prove certain important things. We have to do it all the time. Please speak louder. I'd like to tell you about one case, and that is Nastia was talking about the story that is 1 year long, but that is what's next October or November will be 2 years old, and that is related to former Grey Cardinal of the People's Front, Mykhailo Martynenko, and we started to look at his activities back in 2015. We were making the journalist investigation. The first journalist investigation that we did with Andriy Samokhvalov was on the company Serhiy GZK, that's a state-owned company that's buying uranium concentrate. And now, after the Revolution of Dignity, this company was receiving the uranium concentrate by Austrian company Storm. And even Security Service of Ukraine in spring of 2015 were making searches, and they said that they found out the intermediary who was making money on that, and the sum of schemes was about $15 million a year. But as it always happens, often happens in Ukrainian justice, the case didn't go further than just the searches, and we started investigating it together with Andriy Samokhvalov, and we found out that this company was buying uranium concentrate in Kazakhstan for $25. Then when this concentrate would get to Serhiy GZK, they signed the contract with the Austrian company, and uranium concentrate would cost $115. That's very typical scheme for Ukrainian corruptionists. We also proved that these companies related with to Mykhailo Martynenko. Mykhailo Martynenko was under attention of Ukrainian media, has been under attention of Ukrainian media for all this time. And what he was saying, Ukrainska Pravda are agents of the Kremlin. I personally was talking to him, and he was offending me, and also Mykola Martynenko and those who were around the People's Front. They invented this myth about Gavrilishin, that Ukrainska Pravda is funded by Gavrilishin. I know that 100%. We were previously related, that they were trying to prove that we are related to Lyovochkin and others. But now, because we, just like Hromadske, like other organizations, we are renting out the office. That's why they had this myth. And when you are talking that Mykola Martynenko is a corruptionist and you are trying to prove the scheme, those who are close to People's Front in different interview, his former assistants, the MPs of Народный Front of People's Front were telling everywhere that Ukrainska Pravda is controlled by someone. And interesting things were happening to us. Because when we were investigating that topic, and then we started investigating on how the people around the president and around the prime minister are benefiting from pre-port plant, Odessa pre-port plant, and then we saw the signs that our mail is being interfered, that they're interfering with our mail, and we received the information that there's some information that's submitted to the president about what Ukrainska Pravda is doing. Previously I didn't tell about that. I personally also received not very nice information from some of the MPs and from those who are around Mykola Martynenko. If you don't stop working on this topic, you will have problems. So in the result, Mykola Martynenko had to resign, to leave his mandate, but there was an attack on Ukrainska Pravda, on Serhiy Lещенко, who used to work in Ukrainska Pravda and was working on Martynenko case, and this continues. But together with that, all those who are around Народный Front, People's Front, they say that Ukrainska Pravda are telling lies. They're telling lies about Martynenko, the person who was at Maidan. And the investigation of National Anti-Corruption Bureau started. I know that Martynenko, when he was going to interrogations to NABU, to National Anti-Corruption Bureau, well, our basically investigation became the basis for all the evidence for National Anti-Corruption Bureau. I was at NABU, I have been recently at NABU, and Anishchenko didn't want to tell how he passed the company to Martynenko, and that was key evidence for two cases, for two companies, one that was supplying for some other company. And NABU is also looking for evidence. And this story continues because now NABU has taken that to the court, and this is the case which is now in the court, and Martynenko was released because some of the ministers, MPs from the People's Front, they support him. They say that that's all lies. Interesting things were happening because we received these instructions that we were told about. They were given to us in March last year. I was shocked on how attentively someone's following all our work. There was information even about, even I didn't know, that Nikitin was collecting some information and wanted to make investigation on Ukrposhta he met some person, then he realized that he wouldn't be able to investigate this topic, and he didn't even tell about that. When I received all these Tesh things, but in the interpretation of the Security Service of Ukraine, I'm sure that Security Service of Ukraine is behind that. That looks like that. And what can I say? It's clear that there are no people who are committing some corruption crimes, and they recognize that. But I believe that the best result of that would be court proceedings. And in the nearest future, we'll get some result of that story. Thank you, Sevhil. I will add to that. I have question about this Tesh. The journalists were talking to Poroshenko, and we asked him about that. He's negating many things. I would like to clarify certain details, date by date. And now, Serhiy, you have some special story. It's a new one, and that is the media, what you're doing in Kamyanske. My story is with threats, with other things. As it happens in our work, you cannot understand what's the beginning, what's the end of the story. It hasn't ended up, but it's probably related to the fact. For many years, no, okay, I'll start differently. Starting from 2002 till 2012, I worked in Kiev and independent media of Ukraine, and in times of Kuchma, to protect journalists, we created the group of fast reaction. There was some attack on journalists, and some of our colleagues, professional investigatory journalists, would go there to investigate and to find out whether these attacks at the journalists are related, whether the authorities are doing everything to protect the journalist. And I myself went to such cases several times, but you perceive this situation differently when it happens to you, when at 4 o'clock a.m. the neighbor calls you and says, your car's burning, Serhiy, and you say, okay, it's burning, then it's burning. It's minus 20 outside, you go out and you see that the fire extinguisher is in the trunk of the car, and the neighbors tell you, don't come close because it will be exploded, and you start shooting. And that was the video, which was 19 seconds long, and we put it into YouTube. And then they were saying that he set his car to fire because he was making this video, filming it. But then I realized that that was the state of shock. You cannot think that this may happen to you. When it happens to you, you have some reflexes as a journalist. You understand that there's no police, there are no fire extinguishers, there's no water, you can do nothing, the car's burning, and so is in flames, so you video it. And we journalists, we believe that that's not just something accidental. There were many evidence that there was a special mixture in the car, and it was set to fire. But I can tell you, I've been working for 22 years as a journalist, and in my city, in Dneprodzerzhinsk, it's Kamyanske now, but my car was burned then 6 days after another editor-in-chief was, chief car was burned then. They burned the printing house of some newspaper. The newspaper was called Mafia. I work in the newspaper which is called the City 92, and all the political elite, all the authorities, all law enforcement bodies, they know who ordered to set fire to all these things, because the pressure on our office started before they set the car to fire. I suspect this person, who's a known businessman in Dnipropetrovsk, Volodymyr Dubinsky, but I don't have any direct evidence, proofs. I know that was he who ordered to do that. And then there was a funny situation in the morning when there was a news on our website. We put this news that this happened. The first ones who called were two politicians. One was the mayor of the city. He said, Serhiy, don't think that it was me. It wasn't me who organized. And the second one was politician. On Friday, they had some meetings to call back the MPs from the local councils, and I filmed how they falsify calculation of votes, and it was put on our website. And he was the first politician who called me and said, Serhiy, don't think it's not me. It's not a revenge. And in this situation, you sort of understand who's ordering, who's threatening, who's interested, because they set fire to a car 3 days before the newspaper was published. But you see two types of threats. The first one is physical, how to ensure security. Thank God, for 4 months I've been working with bodyguards. It's not convenient when you watch it. When someone's working with the bodyguards, it looks different, but it's realistic to work as a journalist with bodyguards. You're concerned about your friends, your family. You cannot put bodyguards to everyone. On the other hand, this is a pressure on editorial policy, and at some moment you understand that you have to protect this editorial policy from yourself, because you have a temptation to use the newspaper or website to answer. But fortunately, the journalists who work with me, we used to work together in a different newspaper. And for 4 years, 4 years ago, we agreed with the previous owner that he wouldn't interfere with the editorial policy. Well, basically, the journalists who work, they got used that you have to follow the standards. In practice, it's very difficult. I say that he didn't do it perfectly well, but when this situation happened, when the car was burnt, the journalists themselves initiated discussions how we will protect or defend our editorial policy, so that we are not blamed, that we are just taking revenge. And that's a detective story, basically. It was interesting to write about that, but to be in the epicenter of this detective story is not interesting, because later they were threatening that they would cut your head and you go to police, and they come with interrogations like the car's burned 3 months after the police decided to conduct some expert analysis when the car was just repaired, and I said I just have 2 burnt bumpers and I can bring them to your expert analysis. When you talk to heads of police, they say, we understand who ordered that, but we can do nothing. That's not our level, and that's up to people who are at a higher level. And another problem which you need to keep in mind, all the they use time against you. I said that for this 19 seconds video, the first thing they were blaming you in was that he's burnt it himself, and I was saying that the car cost so much, it had no sense, it would be better to sell the car for this money and put all the billboards around the city. So you're trying to prove it, and they understand that they're just trolling. And then these accusations are published in the newspaper. I was the chief editor of a Reporter newspaper, and they give 4 versions why they set fire to the car, and not a single one was related to professional activity. And they start promoting these versions, and they're using these versions against you. They launched some fake news in Facebook and Kontakte, in social media. They say that you work for mafia, that you have problems in your personal life, sexual others, and other nonsense. And at some moment I made the decision that I need to stop. I should stop reacting to all that absurd information. Otherwise, you will not be able to work as a journalist. And the best way out of the situation is to continue your work as professionally as you can. And there was a moment, my colleagues abroad, for example, who were also concerned about that situation, and they were organizing even evacuation of me from the country. And they were saying, Serhiy, the situation is getting worse, maybe it's time to leave the country. But we decided to do it this way. If we continue our work honestly, we want them to perceive our professional work as the reality. It was convenient for them to work surrounded by newspapers which do not criticize the authorities. If they criticize, then they don't have any evidence. And now our work, journalists downshifting when you leave Kyiv and go to province, but our work there is to show that journalism could be professional, high quality at that level, that here you also have to conduct important investigations, and local elites, local authorities have to take it as the fact. The world has changed and we'll have such journalism here, and all these conflicts are to be moved to the courts, for example, give arguments, prove that the situation is not like you are writing about it. But unfortunately now, in my city, I see that most of political elites are not ready for that. They don't want to have a civilized dialogue with the media. They want to intimidate you using some methods of bandits. And these burnings, that wasn't just a threat to me, to my team of people, but that's the message to all local journalists. If you want to have problems, if you want to get to such situation, try to publish something. And that is how they intimidate everyone, frighten everyone. And their crimes are possible when no one writes about them. We have such a hashtag. At least something is being done. Thank you, Serhiy.
Serhiy, thank you. And now we can go further in our discussion. I think that's a very bad situation when, as a journalist, you find yourself in the midst of all that story about the turmoil. I think that we sufficiently discussed the pressures, intimidation, destroyal of reputation. This summer, previous summer, people who work today in journalism know quite well public figures from power. There's a public speakers, those who intimidate you, who are the tools of that public figures. They really exist. I think that we got adapted to this. We had adapted ourselves. Can you explain the situation today, how do you distinguish between what requires your response, what threats or intimidations require your response, or what you should keep in mind, or what you can just ignore and that's it? Actually, my story with intimidations and threats continue. In my case, with the Ministry of Defense, the situation was engraved with the fact that we live in this country. We are all residents here. We all suffer because of the war. And if you are a journalist at the front line, you have absolutely no intention to make any harm, to make something not in favor of to your army, to your native army, so to say. But on the other hand, when we blamed, when we accused by the ministry, and then never heard their apologies under pretext that the Ministry of Defense never makes apologies. Well, and so what? So our reputation could be damaged. And another negative thing, that some people frankly think that in a situation of war we should not criticize the Ministry of Defense in the midst of the war. Let us do it after the war. And quite often I hear this, let us do something after the war, because in the midst of the war there is a danger that's no use. But I think that it will be too late after the war. We should do this, we should criticize now. It seems to me that the big audience do not accept what we do today because of the war. I cannot ignore them just to say they are not smart enough, we should not take them into account. Also, with the Ministry of Defense, the story turned into the situation that they have introduced trainings for journalists, and only after such a training you can be accredited as a journalist with the ministry and then go to the front line. Now there is this had become a big problem. You cannot get actually to the contact line, and you cannot get to villages, some villages at the front line which are closed, and you will not understand what's going on in those villages. I think that journalism, this is a mirror of a society. I think everybody knows this. There is nothing new, that society is very much traumatized with the war, and in a situation of the war you apply self-censorship, asking yourself what you can disclose in the situation of the war, what you can allow yourself to publish in the situation. Recently we described social violence in Donbass. When I was requested to cover this topic, I agreed, of course, but I understand clearly and can even predict what the response will be. There will be an attack upon us after such text. It's again, be attentive. In a moment, a barrel of shit will be imposed upon you. I can predict and actually what happened, I could predict, and that happened later, that there was a huge violence on both sides, because in the situation of the war, human rights are violated on both sides. And we tried to protect human rights. I was very much shocked while I was writing about this in a situation when we, the free regime, was under intensive discussion abroad, and we were blamed that we wanted to damage the passage of this decision. So in Facebook, the journalists who worked as journalists are now damaging the society, etc. In schemes, we had two stories about cars. Exclusive cars that belong to SBU. I at the very beginning, I tried to investigate that about that luxury cars that belong to SBU employers. Employees, SBU employees, and we tried to find e-declarations about incomes of that people. So we were rejected of that facts because they said to us that now there is a war, while you want to show a picture of a person who is going to the contact area, who people might be killed. You have shown their faces, while you can easily find all that pictures in the internet. Quite often, the structures like SBU, they try to hide behind the need of war and the situation at the front line, to disguise the fact that they have luxury cars, that people have something which they should not have. But I believe that we should not put those topics aside just because we are in the situation of the war. I will come back to another aspect. For me, solidarity of journalists under the post-truth situation is important. All of you have colleagues, you're journalists, and in any situation, try to support your colleagues. When people when your rivals write about you, lie just click on the Facebook and support your colleague. Solidarity is important to be organized. As a former head of the trade union, I had many friends about around journalists, around among OSC staff, in other structures, and all those people started to call me, and they reacted very negatively. So people who took action against me, they did not expect to get such a counter response from people around me, while my friends from different organizations, they supported me. They even asked an investigator, official law enforcement agency, why the investigation was so inefficient. Of course, I was blamed that I did a PR campaign on that, but I think that for serious people, for real people, this was quite clear that such response was inevitable. And each time in Ukraine and in other countries, I think such collective response, collective solidarity of journalists is very important. While in the years 2000, we were thinking how to defend ourselves from the list of imposed topics. Now we should have solidarity and unite all together. Dmytro Gnat, soon after publication of his materials, passing by the SBU, made the picture of one of my characters whom I showed in my material about elite cars, luxury cars that belonged to SBU. Stuff he published that materials, that guy from SBU sued me to court, and I attended the court hearings. He sued Metro while I came in court and witnessed against the claimant. I will add our investigative journalists work together. That's good. But in general, journalist community, journalist community never had the worse situation than now. I've been working in journalism for 12 years now, and even in Yanukovych times, we had a lot of solidarity. We attended Mezhegirya together. We surveyed what was going there. I worked for the opposition channel, TV channel, while now the most close friends may reject from you because you make stories that they believe should be on the topics that they believe should not be covered in public space in a situation of war. For example, we made a story about secret prisons of SBU along the contact line. I received a lot of criticism from my colleagues who believed that we should not cover such topics. topics in course of war, in the midst of the war. There was a real scandal about Anya and Metro material about Sheremet murder. Detector media responded in a way that was not supportive, absolutely not supportive. We were thinking about having discussion about journalist solidarity. We invited Nataliya Ligachova, but the discussion was around the question whether journalists who prepare some some stories, some accurate stories, whether they show them to SBU or law enforcement agencies in advance. By the way, I think it's very symptomatic that in Ukraine, where we have a strong media, which is a watchdog actually, we have a discussion whether we have to show our materials in advance, that is, apply some censorship from enforcement agencies in advance. When the documentary about Pavlo Sheremet investigation was released, we suddenly realized that Pavlo was murdered almost a year ago. Almost each week we send information requests to the law enforcers, and we get regular responses that the investigation goes on. Sometimes you are summoned to come for interrogation, and you feel some hope that somebody is moving. But when you arrive there to the law enforcement, you find out that nothing is changing. And making that documentary, we had an intention to stir up the interest towards this investigation. Then there was a press conference from the president, and we decided to wear special T-shirts devoted to that investigation, to point out that we are concerned about the investigation, and the president promised to take it under his personal control, and this never happened.
And most of the colleagues, they criticized that, I don't know how to call it, well, this move. We just raised the topic, and the most interesting discussion I had with journalist of the 5th channel, Vitaly Gadukevich, who in comments wrote that you turned the press conference into farce, because 5 questions were on Sheremet case, and you were at the press conference, you were thinking not about the citizens of the country, but about how to resolve your own problems, your private problems. I was so much shocked. I could never think that among the journalists, after what had happened before, and that there are no results after 10 months of investigation, and when the journalist of the President channel says that you were resolving your own problems, asking these questions, something's wrong is happening. I would like to add, when we are here, and I believe it's not just in FB, but we always are recollecting how we would come to Mezhygiria, and I believe that it's not just Ukrainian situation. I don't know, when was the moment when you started feeling that you're again on the other side? of not authorities. You are again in confrontation. I would like to ask you about tests. It will be easier for us to understand that it's not just about Ukrainian thing. When people from abroad would come, people from Borovyk Foundation, when people write in war environments, and they were telling about big stories of killings of journalists and Arab journalists. A person, basically the person who received many negative messages, then all the journalists would write something positive to this journalist. Maybe such things do work. I would like to add the next seminar, the next panel, which will have storytelling in video investigations. The speaker will be Joachim Divermark, and he was helping to create this film about murder of Pavlo Sheremet. I would like to compare to others, talking about Tesh. Sevhil and Mykhailo, maybe not just you, but there was a question whether they were really listening to the journalists. Some people are awarded, some people are drinking champagne. It was difficult to ask something, but having such access to president, we asked about robots, about eavesdropping, about listening. He was saying that he's not interested in that. They were there till February 2015. They brought that to him. He said that he doesn't need it. He is not interested. Especially when it comes to journalists. And he said that he doesn't need all these tests. But do you have any evidence that things were happening after February 2015? It was during an informal meeting, but still we asked him and he replied. The last test that I saw was on presentation of Loshkin's book, and that was in March of 2016. And that was an interesting story, because on Monday, what is TESH? Explain. TESH is an analytical note which is prepared by people from the Security Service of Ukraine, which are submitted to the administration of the president. Sometimes they are submitted to the main office, and this is the practice which has been in existence always, but these notes, they look differently. The notes that we had, we could say that the teshes, which or analytical notes, these were prepared for the presidential administration. And there was a case when on Monday, that was the 14th of March, I received an invitation to presentation of Loshkin's book, and on Wednesday we received such a note, and together with Masha we talked on the phone that we need to prepare the material to analyze the book, and such presentation for 600 people at the hotel, I believe that was an Intercontinental, was too much. We talked about that on Wednesday. The test which says personal, I saw it. I received it. That Sevhil instructed Maria to prepare some trendy material about the presentation of the book of the head of the presidential administration. And that was the last Tkach that I saw, and what we received that day was about the period before that, was autumn, winter of 2015-2016. After that, I have never seen such notes or memos. And when we received this information, we started investigating it. We did not publish. Then when there was a murder of Pavlo, I personally gave this envelope to Khatia Dekanaidze, who was at that time the head of the National Police. I was interrogated about that, and only after 5 months later, there were no results of the investigation. We decided to publish these notes in the format that we received, indicating the information where from there was this leakage of information. After that, the Ministry of the Interior, the National Police, opened filed their case, Security Service filed their case. I was interrogated 6 or 7 times. And in the result, after there was the press conference, the last press conference of Minister Avakov, when he was introducing the new head, Knyazev, they said that there was examination, not a single thing was confirmed. Talking about these notes, memos, stashes, what I saw on my talks, that was June 2016, June of 2016. It's an interesting thing. He said that the press conference that till February 2015 he was receiving, but then he decide to punish people because that's illegal. He said, I don't need that. I don't know. But what about investigation? But to say that that's illegal, let's punish those who were doing it. He demonstrated the intention to do something with that. I am not the speaker. I am not speaking on behalf of Poroshenko. If the president would be interested in that, then the resource wouldn't be allocated to follow the journalists. I am far from believing that that's someone else who's interested. I am far from believing that some person's interested who's at lower, of a lower rank. It's probably of interest for the president, for the head of administration, for ministers, and it was happening till 2015, and now it's happening. If the president were interested, he would have punished those who are guilty. And now that was in the lobby, and the president, to underscore that he's democratic, he decided to say that he stopped it. One more thing, after the murder of Pavlo, law enforcement bodies received legal basis for hearing. If you were contacting with Pavlo, then that gives you legal grounds to listen to illegally to journalists, to eavesdrop. And also voluntary battalions, the law enforcement bodies after that case received the permit to eavesdrop. Now I'd like Serhiy to talking about this. It was a surprise, as if I shouldn't have been surprised. The level of corruption in the country is such. There was a case when one businessman, we were I had some calls, I don't know whether they give you data about who you were calling, but I was surprised that for businessmen it's not difficult to get information about who are the sources of the main editor. That is done for money. Just keep that in mind. Our training is on security. I believe that, okay, that is something too much who would be interested in that. But basically, when you are in the center of events and when it's important for some businessmen, they maybe at provincial level, it is done even easier. I'd like you to tell us about your latest adventures, the latest know-how from Kamyanske, and not just from Kamyanske. The situation is like that. In the beginning, they are pressing the investors, the owners, then they threatened you, they said to fire your cars, they threatened to cut your head off, but finally the newspapers published and the information space changes, and other newspapers are to react to these changes which are not under the control of this business group. And then your competitors start publishing some investigations about the same business group, about their corrupt influence on authorities. And what do they do? Here's a newspaper. That's the newspaper which these businessmen own. That was the newspaper owned by Vilkul, and it was called the Sabitya Events, and they had another brand which was registered as Sabitya Today, but they were publishing it, and Vilkul had problems with elections in Kryvyi Rih, and he did not pay attention to the newspaper. That's the newspaper they started publishing it in December of 2015, immediately after local elections. Then in April 2016, they bought this newspaper where I was the editor-in-chief, and we had an agreement not to interfere into the policy, editorial policy, and we started to develop the reputation of great journalists, and our first awards we received when we worked here as investigators. Having these two newspapers, the competitors, we had competitors that stole his newspaper with the old brand, Sabitya. Now this newspaper publishes many critical information about this business group, and this business group also has another newspaper. That's a newspaper of the mayor, and they write that the mayor is doing everything well, but out of printed media, these are main ones. And when we started publishing investigations, some research, some articles, we were even publishing the interviews with managers, top managers of this corrupt business group. If they do something well, if they have some charity foundation, we write that that's a great thing they're doing. But if we found out some corruption scheme, we write about that. And then Vilkul's newspaper started also printing it. That's a real newspaper. And 2 weeks ago, there was such a newspaper in kiosk. This is 350 and this is 2 hryvnias. And immediately, I had the meeting in the morning, and they say, "What is this Sabitya for 2 hryvnias?" I say, "I've never heard about that." We buy it in a kiosk. And the sales lady says when some elderly people come, and ask for the newspaper. They say, which one do you want? And the elderly people say, give us the one for 2 hryvnias. If you look at the content of this newspaper, this will be absolutely the same as the content of this newspaper. So they made a clone, which, as looking at design, looks as the newspaper of the competitors, but in content it's their newspaper. We tried to find out how could this newspaper get to Ukrposhta, because it should have its own certificate, but this newspaper is called Сегодня, and this one События. And the real one, for which they have the certificate, is called События сегодня. Basically, they have the certificate for or permit for this newspaper, and they publish to other newspapers, and so they get to the post. So that's what they're doing. And I believe and that is the violation of the law, but there was no reaction in Ukrpochta. They said we signed additional agreement and there was an order from above, and that's why we're doing it.
Буде правда, українська правда і ще якась.
There will be Pravda, Ukrainska, Pravda, and something else. There was such a trolling. There was a resource Ukrainska Pravda, and then there was a printed version of Ukrainska Pravda in times of Yanukovych back in 2018.
Зараз будуть запитання з залу, я всіх буду просити до мікрофона підходити, тому що це також перекладається. В мене останнє, це ж
my last question is,
найбільша претензія.
you know what does the audience say that the journalist investigators try to create panic? It's difficult in the country. Something's reforming, but as soon as you do something, you are criticized. And you are writing only about negative. The investigation is great, but very often you exaggerate and you're looking for some negative things
from proactive people. And what will your response to such claims? For example, yesterday there was a question why the investigating journalists do not speak about positive things. We have Tkach, Ukraine to speak about positive things. Investigative journalists should investigate. The major claim is that you try to find something bad even in very negligible things. I got accustomed to the situation when a negative is emphasized around investigative journalists. I deal with combat activities in Donbass, and in winter, when the attention of broad public was pointed out to Avdiivka, we vice versa noticed that people remained calm, the people were confident in the situation. We just came there and showed that the situation was not as grave as some people tried to show this, but vice versa. We calmed people down, showing that everything was under control. That is, I do not think that we want to show something negative or to exalt some negative trends. Sometimes we do not reflect on the fact that during the last 3 years, a lot of news that were coming, these were negative events, and we became a source of negative emotions, and this influences the attitude of people towards us. They perceive us as a source of negative emotions. As to the people's perception, recent Ukraine's victory in the Stockholm Tribunal, and there was a decision, there was a court arbitration ruling on our about our contract, and Ukraine won in one of the claims that he posed, and the editor showed the highlight. Naftagaz speaks about local win over Gazprom, and we were blamed that Ukrainska Pravda is not happy with our victory. It diminishes the scale of our victory, etc. So we changed the title of that article. It reflected actually the situation correctly. We just mentioned that it was intermediary decision, intermediary court ruling, not final court ruling, just local ruling, as we called it. But we were blamed that Ukrainska Pravda published only negative news. And we would like to present positive news, but quite often there are no positive news. Well, recently I found out that some low government official received $5 million bribe for something non-important. Actually, when I look at our news websites, I see that there is a total negative. I'm very much surprised with the fact that quite often people keep saying that do not criticize the government in the midst of war, but on the other hand, people believe that people who deal with corruption in the situation of war in the country, they have to deal with very difficult circumstances. They have to be more courageous. Yesterday we had Bogdan, our colleague. He is now on holiday, and when he is on holiday, he allows himself to express more emotions. He often used to say, we just inform the society about important things, irrespectively whether they are positive or negative. Please do no negative things, and we would not present any negative stories to you. So we are just a mirror. Probably everybody faces the situation when we are blamed in accusations against power, and several some time ago, we got together and discussed what was positive in the actions of authorities, and not to present something negative, but we showed everything possible positive, and the authorities were shocked of this, our action. Our editorial policy is to balance both positive and negative news. We do not reject from the idea of investigative journalism, but we decided to point out some positive news to balance the vision of people. I think this is a challenge. Quite often, several times a month, I have to speak abroad about situation in Ukraine. Of course, in these conditions of counteraction to propaganda, which states that Ukraine had already disappeared, that it is totally destroyed, we have to point out to positive things when we are abroad. On that very day when e-declarations were exposed to broad public, we immediately, I was in Washington, I was blamed that we had once again caused a scandal in Ukraine, that something again is wrong with Ukraine. So being abroad, I had to say that for the first time we had such a powerful instrument as a declaration. They were exposed for the first time, and that was the most important, not the facts published in e-declarations. There is a saying, if you need to explain, if you are required to explain, there is no need to explain. I think that system of values pertaining to one person may be very much different from system of values different of other person. If some people believe that you should not criticize the government, that you should write something positive but not harm the reputation of the country, then you should explain nothing to such people. Thomas Paine used to say that that the biggest patriotism is to defend your country from your government, while people believe that defending the country should defend the government. Journalists quite often agree with this point of view of those people who demand positive. I will respond to this. We are in a situation when we have to explain the rules of our profession. Sometimes we have some audience which do not understand what we should do, so we should explain to them. We had to explain about military journalism. I would like to end that it looks like you say everything correct, that we should pay no attention at people with different values. But quite often you feel an attack. When I received thousands of negative comments, when you try to disclaim, and you can do nothing absolutely. people cannot deal with the huge bulk of information, and when you do not respond to their opinion that you are a traitor, the next your investigation will be perceived as an investigation made by a traitor. Thus, this damages your reputation, and there will be useless. In Berlin recently, journalists, my colleagues, explained to me that they explain to people the procedure, how they do the investigation, because they found out that they should be clear to people. I see 2 more questions. Mykhailo will answer. I think that we lost in that unequal struggle because we expose those people who are not numerous, but we expose them. On the other hand, when some official pretends he is or she is defending the country but violates the law, it makes more damage to the country than a journalist who exposes his violations.
Frankly speaking, I was managing to do it in the past. Anyone sitting here could confirm that these attacks they do leave some traces. Sometimes you start crying, and here we can say that they have done it, and we have achieved our goal, and that's just the beginning. Shabunin's case. Shabunin, who's attacking the president, or Shabunin, who's attacking Filimonenko. When Shabunin started answering, Filimonenko hit him. That lowers down the level of discussion, because Shabunin is not talking about the president or the prosecutor general, but he's answering to this other person, and there will be many persons like that, the trolleys, whatever you call them, trolls, and the same will happen to us. What is happening, these are just flowers. We'll get berries closer to presidential elections. We need to get ready morally, but as to not answering, we need to answer. And that was our mistake, because at some moment of time we had to submit, to file the case to the court against these MPs. And in the court we had to prove who's the real owner of Ukrainska Pravda. That Alena Pritula is an owner, has been the owner for 17 years. But we thought, okay, 10 years ago they were trying to prove that we are related to someone. Let's not answer that. But the interviews of these MPs, people read them, and you cannot follow everything. What bloggers are writing, what bloggers are saying, you cannot follow all the rumors and how they influence you in reputation. Now I know for sure that for any accusation, if there's any accusation, will go to court. And there are many people who are now persecuting Shabunin. They call themselves journalists, bloggers, and the white audience doesn't understand where the person's from, and they believe that's the journalist, like Dmitry Gnap or like others. And it's not just counteracting politicians, but counteracting these people. We need to tell that these bloggers, it's not just that they have good job and they write 70,000 posts a day because they are motivated, and Nastia Stanko was adjusting the fire. We need to find time and inspiration to show that these are lies. The market of bloggers has been created on purpose. Talking about military journalism, official press services, when they cover the work of some ministry or some other institution, they always work more as PR service. They promote positive news, but they don't talk about negative news. How much can we trust the official information of the Ministry of Defense? How much negative information is not given? I can tell you about several cases in my experience when people would call us from the general staff and they were saying that there was a mistaken number of people wounded and killed. We were correcting. I believe Nastia probably can tell you more, but I have the suspicion, doubt, that these figures do not correspond to the reality. I can tell you that official data on killed and wounded more or less correspond to the reality. How does it happen? You know, volunteers know, or some people know that people were killed here and there. Yesterday knew that there were 3 killed. Today they said that 4 were killed in Shirokino, but you cannot confirm it officially because now there's instruction that no one can do it but the press officers of ATO. Only they can inform about the data. And it's so strict now that people are afraid. And they say, never refer to me, never say that that's our brigade that said it. It's all over the front line. But in general, I can tell about military journalism. All the time when you go somewhere, they say that the video should be, this story should be positive. You go to war and there are 2 killed and 3 wounded, and whatever you want to do, you cannot make a positive news. And very often we say that 85% of news from frontline are about nothing. It's about how they cook there, it's about cats and dogs, but there are many, many problems there. The violence, there are stories of prostitution and AIDS. War is accompanied by these things, the suicides. There are millions of stories. I cannot publish it all, but we are trying to do it. And all these stories are not told, but very often you need to say about the Ministry of Defense, they do react. I believe that now the Ministry of Defense is working better. They react, they pay attention to the stories about some violence of military, but and they want now to create this military police. I believe that's the substitution of certain things. The bodies which are there, they should start working, but not new bodies with new budgets. Because those which are there, they could and they should be investigating on crimes. That's one story. Another one is I wanted, we make the story about Benjamin Fischer, the Austrian who was fighting as part of armed forces of Ukraine, and now he's in court in Austria because he was killing the people imprisoned, and we want to call the Ministry of Defense. What have they found out about Fischer? what's Austria investigating, and every time they tell me, why are you interested in fish? Our guys had trainings, had exercises, that's a great news, great picture. I say, okay, but what about fish? That's the problem, to talk about positive but not negative. There's a translation. I am Oleg Veremenko. I would like to confirm what Nastia said, or to support what Nastia said. In fact, I was listening attentively. You are complaining that journalists, that the cars are set to fire, that they killed the journalists. It's not investigated. I will tell you more. It's not just about journalists, about military, civil activists, lawyers, and so on. There's an attack on human rights in the country. And all you are talking about, 100% I support, that they're saying the same thing. They say, we ask question, for example, where did you get this car which cost $200,000, and you are just the clerk in security service? And they said it's none of your business. And the question is, today the security service of Ukraine is the only body which does not submit any e-declarations, any reports. Why this is the issue which no one discusses. I have a hobby. I work as a lawyer. One of our colleagues was killed. The case of Yuri Grabovsky. Among the lawyers, I hear many ideas, and some believe that special service could be involved. No one investigates on that. What Nastia says, secret presence of security service. I didn't believe into that for 2 years. Then I read some of the reports. I talked to some people. And I will give you an example. There's a book, Gena Fimin, the person's talking about himself being imprisoned. He was first imprisoned by terrorists and then by his own people, when no one's writing about that, about filtration camps and other things. And my question is, well, besides Radio Liberty, besides Nastia, Stanko, who can say that they're investigating the cases of corruption in security service? I will give a chance to answer this question and then one final. In fact, Deutsche Welle wrote about prisons. Ukrainska Pravda also wrote about that. They were writing about prisons of security services. BBC also, but most of those they are who are financed from abroad. But I'm surprised. This is the story that didn't concern anyone. No one said, let's investigate to find out whether that's true or not. No one wanted even to talk to people who were saying we were missing for a year and a half. Like Sevhil is saying, we in Hromadske believe that human rights are also part of our mission, and Ukraine cannot illegally keep people in prisons like so-called DPR and LPR. Now we found out that no one's kept there. So basically, we ensure that that's happened. All these things are happening legally, but why not before? I would like to sum it up. I believe that all of us do not want to get separated. We are saints, and there are people who do not understand, and there are some other journalists, but in fact, it's interesting. There was a moment we represent more or less independent small TV channels or publications, and why it is difficult to work, because the stories that we make, they could be influential, but there's a limit why certain things do not become the issues for national investigation. Many things cannot happen if this is not supported by national channels. When 5 years ago we were creating Stop Censorship, there was a desire to get the journalists from central channels involved. And now we are again getting further away. This circle of so-called independent media people gets narrower, and then the rest are large media. I have a question what to do with that. We don't want to stay in this ghetto of people who are sort of claiming to say we work and we are the best. It's a wrong position. If we don't expand this circle, nothing will happen. And I don't know what to do with that. What was happening then? Those who did not work at central TV channels, Inter, 1+1, you would carefully call people and you would say, Serhiy Andrushka, maybe you are at STB, maybe you will join. And you knew where you can call, where you cannot call. Now I don't know. I have big hopes that the public broadcasting will become a big player in the market. And they will create big competition, and our rules of game in the media market will change. Otherwise, I don't see anything else. It's difficult for me to answer your question. I believe that the killing of murder of Pavlo is a topic uniting all the journalists, but even there some people believe that we use it for PR or for resolving our personal problems. Many people believe it. That's the problem of current times, the problem of society, the problem of attitude to political elite. We need to make analysis, and it shouldn't be just our analysis, but the analysis of what's happening in the country. Like oligarchic channels. Just hearing some media, I can recognize what is the channel. Is it the channel of Kamyanske, Akhmetov, Levachkin? Whether it's possible to get united into some trade union, it's a complicated issue. I believe now not. I believe as minimum we need maybe to create again the structure Stop Corruption. We're talking about things that's good. But if it's more powerful, it will be better. And we wouldn't be waiting for Mezhigiria Fest. And if there's the situation like Ligacheva has with the film, then we can discuss these issues, not just on Facebook, but at a large scale. First thing we need to do is get united. I believe that many will join. I believe that we need to get united, not around the idea, not around the personality, because Stop Censorship, it was around the personality. That was the trade union of a part of some journalists, of some part of journalists. I believe we need to get united around values. If we formulate the values or ideals, and if we try to get united around that, maybe we will succeed. What should Ukrainian journalism be like now? What should be the goals? If it's a round idea, then in the result, it's the project of the personality. I am more optimist as the former head of trade union. I believe in the force of journalist association. I agree with Serhiy. We need to get united, not because I want to be friends with this one and not want to be friends with another one. We need to understand what are the goals of the organization that we will create. Now, yeah, I am on the other side of the barricade, but I understand that there should be organization that would be protecting the rights of journalists from chief editors, so that we do not abuse our rights, and that's true. If there's no trade union in the editorial office, then the editor can abuse his rights because he wants to make his TV channel or publication better. Talking about Commission of Journalists, ethics. People believe that we don't need the organization that will be condemning people. We need self-regulation. We need the structure which will help us to differentiate whether that's professional journalist or non-professional journalist. This is according to the standards and this is not. I talked to representatives of such organizations in Europe, and such organizations are trying to make it easier for journalists to understand the media landscape. What was good yesterday could become evil today. Organization which will be responsible for safety of journalists. We often criticize the Union of Journalists. We say that that's post-Soviet organization, but people change that. There are many new people. I've been member of the Union of Journalists since 1996, and I see many activities which are good for us. Maybe we all need Nataliya Ligacheva, Alona Pritula. When we were creating the Trade Union of Journalists, there was a choice to create a new one or not, but I said, let us together join something. But we rejected this idea. Maybe it's time now. Maybe we need maybe we can create some new structure. But looking at the number of discussions about that, I believe we are close to this, to the time when we get together and we say we need some new structure, we need to become part of some organization. Okay, we're all here, we're not disappearing. I believe personally you will be able to ask each one a question. We will have lunch now. I believe that we've been talking for 2 hours non-stop. Thank you all. Sometimes you don't need to invent a bicycle. Sometimes people say there are rules of profession, and we are trying to say that we don't have any other way. Thank you all.